Good evening. I am Allie Rosenberg, one of the co-chairs of the Town of Newcastle's Holocaust and Human Rights Committee. On behalf of my co-chair, Stacy Science, the members of our committee, the students of Enough, and the Town of Newcastle, I would like to welcome you to Newcastle's first annual Human Rights Day program. During tonight's program, we will hear words from the students of Enough, Zabine Mirza, co-chair of Newcastle's Council on Race and Equity, one of Newcastle's most recognizable residents, President Bill Clinton, and our world-renowned keynote speaker, Stephen D. Smith, who has committed his life to the understanding and importance of protecting and advocating for human rights. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Horace Greeley's Director of Student Life and the current advisor of Enough, Matt Friedler.
Thank you so much, Allie. Since its founding last year at Greeley, the Student Club Enough has developed a thriving organization to help and improve and strengthen our school community. At Greeley, we appreciate and value student leadership and student voice. It is essential that our students understand their own agency and power. The students of Enough have quickly discovered their voice. As the current advisor for Enough, I have the privilege of introducing our student leadership team. Sam Rosenberg and Charlie Gordon are founding members and co-presidents of Enough. Please join me in welcoming them this evening.
Thank you for joining us tonight in honor of Human Rights Day. My name is Sam Rosenberg.
And I'm Charlie Gordon.
Human Rights Day is observed by the international community every year on December 10th. It commemorates the day in 1948 when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Human Rights Day is a chance for us to remember and to teach that hate is not acceptable. The mission of our club Enough, which stands for Educate Now on Understanding Genocide and Hate, is to empower students to stand up to hate and to develop a community of tolerance through education and the understanding of people's differences.
As the next generation, we understand that we have a responsibility to educate ourselves and others on the hate that exists across the world and right here at home. We hope through the messages shared tonight, we are empowering you, our community, to stand up for human rights for every individual. As Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Now we would like to introduce two members of Enough, Hayden Parsons and Leela Young.
As you all know, UN Human Rights Day is coming up on the 10th of this month. There is currently an ongoing human rights crisis occurring in Myanmar. I knew that I wanted to spread the word and aim to make a difference. Something that was apparent to me is that while some are informed, there are many Greeley students who may not be aware of the mass genocide that is highly affecting so many people.
Rohingya Muslims are an ethnic group located in Myanmar, who are one of the most discriminated people in the world. Today, they face a series of prosecutions led by their government, which can be referred to as a type of ethnic cleansing or genocide.
Rohingya Muslims living among a majority Buddhist population are being denied citizenship, claimed to be illegal immigrants from Bangladesh.
The country's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, a self-proclaimed civil rights advocate, has not addressed the rapes, murders, and genocide occurring, nor has she condemned the military for its crimes.
After facing brutality and attacks by ARSA militants on more than 30 police posts, Rohingya Muslims have been fleeing to seek safety. Most have taken refuge in Bangladesh, with others residing in India, Thailand, Malaysia, and other parts of South and Southeast Asia. Here in these densely populated camps, refugees have limited access to education and healthcare, and due to the recent events of COVID-19, they face even more hardships.
The second genocidal phase has been ongoing since August 2017, and there are still around 500,000 Rohingya living in Myanmar at risk for ethnic genocide. People are currently facing rape, murder, arson, and beatings due simply to their ethnicity as Muslims.
This is clearly a major human rights crisis, and we are currently planning a fundraiser for refugee relief. UNICEF pushes for refugees access to education, medication, vaccines, clean drinking water, and counseling. And further, we hope that by educating our peers about this, we can spread awareness as well as messages of anti-hate.
If you are able to, we would greatly appreciate any and all contributions to this cause. We are now sharing the donation information on the screen. Donations can be made by check or cash. If possible, please take a screenshot of this information. And we will also be sharing this information on Canvas with the Greeley students, and it will be posted on the Town of Newcastle website as well. We appreciate your help and generosity as we raise funds to support the Rohingya refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayden and Leela, for working so hard on this initiative in order to raise our community's awareness about the plight of the Rohingya. Next, I'm pleased to introduce one of Newcastle co-chairs of the Council on Race and Equity, Zabeen Mirza.
Thank you, Stacy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here at this most important event. Right now, there are over 1 million Uyghur Muslims being detained in concentration camps in China. Many more have mysteriously disappeared. Right now, nearly 900,000 Rohingya refugees are living in the world's largest refugee camp in Bangladesh, fleeing extermination in Myanmar. Right now, 12 million people in Syria need humanitarian assistance, at least half of whom are children. But let's look closer to home. Right now, there are 66,337 migrants and children detained in cages at the American southern border. Right now, 34 million people live below the poverty line right here in the US. Right now, 31 million here in the United States do not have health insurance, while 43.4% of US adults aged 19 to 64 are inadequately insured. Right now, there are 2.3 million people in the American prison system. We are home to the largest prison population in the world. Not to mention, to date, this year alone, 220 Black and Hispanic people have been shot and killed by police officers. I don't have enough time to say all their names here today, but I do have the time to say Black Lives Matter. My name is Zabeen Mirza, and I am co-chairperson of the Newcastle Council on Race and Equity, the CRE. My co-chair, Nichelle Maynard Elliott, and I oversee a council of 115 council members in our community, actively working towards achieving true racial diversity, equity, and inclusivity here in Newcastle. The work we do spans everything from education to outreach to environmental work, police reform, health and wellness, business and commerce, and so much more. Our council, in the short time since our inception this past June, has been working tirelessly to improve the quality of life for residents of color and marginalized groups within our community. Our council has been working tirelessly to ensure human rights for our communities of color right here in Newcastle. The United Nations states that human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights include the right to social protection, the right to an adequate standard of living, and to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental well-being, the right to education, and the enjoyment of benefits of cultural freedom and scientific progress. These are all human rights, and everyone is entitled to these rights without discrimination. When we talk about human rights, it's easy to think about other countries and other places. We think about Africa, we think about Asia, we think about countries that don't enjoy a democracy like we do. We think about countries that are underdeveloped. But the fact of the matter is, human rights violations happen right here at home in the United States. They happen right here at home in blue liberal states like New York. They happen right here at home in our backyard in Newcastle, right here in Chappaqua. Human rights violations aren't an over there problem. It's a right here at home problem too. Our long sordid history of genocide and slavery aside, just looking back at the last year alone, we cannot say that we in the United States are truly champions of human rights when there are children in cages at our southern borders, when dreamers and refugees are turned away from our shores. We cannot say that we are truly leaders when Black and brown women are murdered by police officers, when Black and brown communities are disproportionately dying from COVID, diabetes, heart disease, childbirth, when people of all colors are dying because they have no access to healthcare or life-saving medicine, when women's bodies are being governed by men, and when Flint, Michigan still does not have clean drinking water. when the very purported leaders of the free world are giving mandates from the White House to inspire Islamophobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and white supremacy. We cannot pretend that we are leaders of the free world or champions of human rights when our very communities right here at home are subjected to human rights violations. When our children right here in Chappaqua are subjected to racial slurs and hate incidents at school, and families of color are made to feel unwelcome, unheard, unimportant. We cannot pretend that human rights violations are an over there problem when they are very much a reality right here in our own backyards. Human rights violations are a major cause for concern. They deprive people of the very things that ensure their own humanity. To not have the most basic, fundamental of human rights is a soul-crushing, crippling, terrifying, and debilitating existence. That existence is lived every day right here in this country, right here in this community. No amount of empathy, awareness, or wokeness will make a difference without people coming together to truly affect change, to truly understand their privilege and to use it to protect those without. On Human Rights Day, we should recognize human rights violations, but we should also recognize how we can take steps to help marginalized communities reclaim the rights they've been stripped of. At the simplest level, what we need to be doing is unpacking our own ego and our own privileges. What we need to be doing is taking stock of our own biases and prejudices and working hard to remove them. What we need to be doing is listening, learning, and amplifying the voices of the marginalized. And you don't need to look very far to find those voices. They are your friends, your neighbors, your students, and community members right here at home. Every day is Human Rights Day here at the CRE, because every day people of color are fighting for their basic human rights. Do not for a second be fooled into a false sense of safety or immunity from the most fundamental of human rights violations, simply because we live in an affluent liberal community in an affluent democratic country. And do not for a second believe that just because something does not affect you personally, that it does not affect others. Audre Lorde said, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. And I am not free as long as one person of color remains chained, nor is any of you." Thank you, God bless you, and God bless those fighting to truly make America land of the free for all, not just for some.
Thank you, Zabine, for your important words and for the acts that you are leading the CRE in our community to take to affect change. Thank you so much. We will now hear an important message from President Clinton.
I'm honored to join all of you as you commemorate Human Rights Day. I want to thank the student leaders of Enough at Greeley High School and everyone from the town of Newcastle's Holocaust and Human Rights Committee for putting tonight's program together. I was proud to be with you last year for the dedication of the Newcastle Holocaust Memorial, and I'm grateful for all you've done since then to advance justice, progress, and human rights in our community across America and around the world. As we come together at the end of a year that's been unlike any we've ever known, your work is more important than ever. The events of 2020 have revealed anew the deep inequalities and divisions that exist within our own society and across the globe. On this day and every day, it's up to all of us to make the decision that our common humanity matters more than our interesting differences, that we can all do something to expand the definition of us and shrink the definition of them, that this challenging moment gives us the opportunity to reimagine what our future should and could actually look like. From the plight of the Uyghurs and the Rohingya, to the crises in Yemen and Venezuela, to the ongoing and long overdue reckoning with racism in America, there is still so much more work to be done. But because of the efforts of people like you, I believe we can one day build a future of genuine belonging, where people from every background, race, ethnicity, religion, gender, and sexual identity are afforded the opportunities to achieve their full potential and to know that their neighbors are pulling for them. Your work makes me proud to be part of this community. I send my best wishes to all of you and your loved ones for health, safety, and happiness.
We thank President Clinton for sharing these powerful words with our community this evening. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Stephen D. Smith. Stephen is the UNESCO Chair on Genocide Education and the Vinci Viterbi Executive Director of the USC Shoah Foundation, the former director of the Kigali Memorial Center in Rwanda, the founder of the UK Holocaust Center in England, adjunct professor at USC, author of Never Again, Yet Again, and holds 2 honorary doctorates. Please give a warm virtual welcome to Stephen D. Smith.
Well, thank you, Ali, and thank you everybody for having me this evening. I'm sorry to join you a few minutes late. The advantage, of course, of being on these virtual events is I went from the LA Jewish Film Festival to your event this evening without getting out of my chair and just switching Zooms. That's the amazing thing about this. The sad thing about this is, of course, I would love to have been with you to meet you all in person this evening and to be inspired further by you, because I have to say, if I had my way right now, I would just sit back in this chair and listen to you. Because what I heard getting on this call and what you said was, well, if the outcome had been a fraction of what you'd said, I would have gone away feeling very happy. You have already inspired me by what you've shared. Thank you. Thank you for being advocates for humanity. Thank you for, being involved in the CRE, for forming enough, for doing the Holocaust Memorial. You don't have to do any of those things. And the fact that you choose to do them, and the fact that you choose to show up at 8 o'clock in the evening, all 128 of you, to talk about this on a week when we are thinking about human rights, is just inspiring in its own right. This week, I'm going to just share a screen with you, just so I can share a few slides as we go along. Give me 1 second. This week, I was trying to be clever, by the way, with my title here, but I realized that you guys have already got it right. When Zabine was talking right now, she was just saying enough is enough. And thank you for that, Zabine. And Leela and Hayden, thank you for being so clear about what we need to be doing and for whom right now, because enough is enough. You might be wondering why there's a Holocaust survivor on a green screen while we're talking about human rights, and we're going to come back to that a little bit later. This week, there are 2 dates which we have to consider. 9th of December is the anniversary, the 72nd anniversary of the UN Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, followed the following day in 1948 by the Declaration of Human Rights. There is a reason why these 2 conventions, or the Declaration of Human Rights and the Convention on Genocide, follow each other. It's because the world had just gone through one of the greatest upheavals of all time, the Holocaust, and the reckoning was happening. What do we do in a world in which clearly the human rights of individuals had been taken to the extent in which genocide was possible, and 6 million Jews, 5 million victims of Nazi genocidal policy against Roma and Sinti and a variety of other groups, including LGBTQ groups and so forth, had ripped through Europe and left millions dead. And the world was coming to terms with, so what kind of world do we want to live in? And here we are 72 years later, still asking that question, as you just rightly pointed out, that there are 1 million Uyghur as we speak in detention camps. There are over 600,000 Rohingya who you are raising money for today, and thank you for doing that, who just need to hear our voice just to feel that they're not alone in the world, because they have been completely abandoned in a world that said 72 years ago, we will be there for you. So 1994, the film Schindler's List had just come out, and Steven Spielberg was on the stage at the Academy Awards picking up the Oscar for Best Movie, Best Picture. And he spoke to the audience, which obviously was the people in the theater and those around the world watching the Oscars, and said, tell this to your children. What he was saying was there are 300,000 Holocaust survivors in the world today, and they are our teachers. Just listen to them and then tell your children what they tell to you. It's a very powerful message because out of that, the following day, almost, the Shoah Foundation came into being. The Shoah Foundation is an archive of testimonies founded by filmmaker Steven Spielberg in order to tell, initially, to tell the story of those who saw and witnessed the Holocaust. He and the team went around the world and collected over 50,000 testimonies of the victims and witnesses, the survivors and witnesses to the Holocaust. Not only Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, although that was the vast majority, but also Roma and Sinti who'd been persecuted and experienced genocidal Nazi atrocities, and a whole variety of different groups of people, including people who went and conducted war crimes trials and tried to get justice after this atrocious, horrific situation that had occurred. Today, if you come to the USC Shoah Foundation, the archive looks something like this picture here. All these 5 people are residents of Los Angeles. 2 of them have subsequently passed away. Mrs. Salibian, who is in the middle at the bottom there, was 104 when she passed away. She was a survivor of the Armenian genocide that took place 1915 to 1917. And the gentleman at the top there, Dario Gabai, passed away actually during the last few months. He was one of the last witnesses to the gas chambers at Auschwitz, where Dario worked as one of the Sonderkommando and was a good personal friend of mine. And I was very sad not to be able to go to his funeral because of the pandemic restrictions. The 3 beautiful ladies there are from Rwanda, from Cambodia, from Guatemala. They're also in our archive, also the survivors of genocide. And these 5 faces represent over a century of genocide that are captured in the archive of the Shoah Foundation. But that archive doesn't exist to tell the story of the past. That archive exists to inspire us in the present. And I hope that after this event, some of you will go to the Shoah Foundation's archive. You can find it, obviously, just by Googling the Shoah Foundation. But if you want to dig into the archive, the URL for that is VHA, Visual History Archive, VHA online. .usc.edu, and I'll try and put that in the chat a little later, so that you can go and find these testimonies, or you can just go to YouTube and type in the Shoah Foundation. We have 3,000 there, so that will keep you busy for several days at least, because I think there are about 7,000 hours of testimony on YouTube if you want to spend some time listening. But so what is testimony actually? What's this all about? Well, this is a camera, as you can see, that we were filming last year, about this time last year in Iraq. I was over there with a team of Shoah Foundation members, and we were over there because you might remember there was an announcement made by the president of Turkey that he was going to create a safe zone in northern Syria. For those of us who are involved in genocide prevention, when we hear safe zone, we usually put the 2 letters UN in front of it, and they don't stand for UN. It means unsafe for some. Because usually safe zones are not there to protect civilians. Safe zones are set up generally in order to control territories. And so when President Erdogan of Turkey was looking to create a safe zone, and President Trump was agreeing with that idea, it made me feel extremely cautious, because the people living in that territory, particularly the Kurds living in that territory, weren't going to have friends on either side of that safe zone that they could trust. And so I flew over to Iraq and met some of these refugees as they came over the border and interviewed them. There was a reason why we're interviewing the refugees in real time with our cameras in Iraq, because what happens is when atrocities start to happen in the world, wherever they happen, generally speaking, for the longest time, there is low-level atrocity occurring to victims, but nobody really hears them because nobody's interested in the political situation because it hasn't heated up. Then when it heats up, nobody's interested in talking to the victims because they're interested in trying to solve the political problem, or what might become a military problem, or a problem of occupation, or whatever it becomes. And so the people who have least voice in solving the problem which most affects them are the victims. I first discovered this when I was looking at what happened to the Jews in Europe in the 1930s. I tripped across a book in an antiquarian bookshop. It was called The Yellow Spot: The Destruction of Europe's Jews. So obviously it was a Holocaust book. So I bought the book and I went home and then I opened it. And to my surprise, the date of the book was 1936. That's 3 years before the Second World War and 5 years before the first gas chambers were built. The yellow spot, the destruction of Germany's Jews it was. So I read the book, 250 pages, and most of the book was compiled of the impact of laws that were introduced on Jews in the early 1930s and how Jews were coping with those laws. And what we heard in that book was about the victim's perspective. Had the world listened to what the Jews were saying in that book in 1935, they, like the authors, could have predicted the Holocaust because the victims already knew. Victims know what's happening more than anybody else because when a government moves against them, the impact on the individual is so immense it completely destroys their life, as happened to the Jews long before the first Jews were murdered. What I wanted to find out here in Iraq was, I asked the basic question. So, will you go back? Oh, no, first question. Why did you leave? Well, my home was being bombed. I didn't want my children to die. Will you go back if it's safe? Well, no, I won't go back because I don't have security. But if the bombs have stopped, surely you'll be safe. No, but I won't have security because the safe zone isn't safe for me. When you hear a civilian tell you that, you know what the circumstances are that have been created, because in fact, she knows it's not just about shells coming in. What happens is when the shells stop coming in, the cameras leave, everyone packs up and goes away, and then she and her family still have to deal with the persecution and the destruction of her livelihood and her freedom and her ability to live safely. So the reason we take testimony in real time is victims can tell us what the real circumstances are, when sometimes the media and the policymakers can't, or maybe don't read it in the same way. I want to go back in time, actually 100 years, to 1915. This is a German. Not that you can tell it necessarily. He's got a headdress on that looks like he might be in the Middle East, because he was in the Middle East, and he is also wearing a red cross. That's not a German Iron Cross, that's actually the Red Cross symbol for someone who was serving in the, what they called the sanitary corps. It was the medical corps. This young gentleman was a pacifist. And so when he was deployed to the German army, he volunteered for the medical corps. He was sent to the Middle East, and he was in the desert of Syria. And while he was there, he saw Armenians being taken out into the desert, and he was very concerned by what he saw. And so he took out his camera, which you can see down there. I referenced that because in the previous image, we had a picture of a camera. 100 years previously, this gentleman got his camera out and went out the weekend and photographed what he saw. This is what his camera saw in Armenia, in the desert, in Syria. And this is what he saw. And in fact, today, if you look at images of the Armenian genocide, virtually all the photographs were taken by the same camera, by one man who said, I need to document this. I need to tell this story because people won't believe it if it's not documented. It didn't go down very well with his superiors in the German army when it was discovered what he was doing. And in fact, he was sent back to Germany. However, he had one of those huge, big aluminum buckles on his belt, and he literally stuck the film in the back of his belt. And when he was sent back to Germany, he had the film with him, which he processed and widely distributed, and tried actually after the Armenian genocide to fight for justice. This was the area where he was. You can see here this area where the Armenian genocide took place over 100 years ago. What's quite interesting about it is, and I only discovered this today when I got this map out, he took this photograph somewhere around about here in the northern part of Syria, in this sort of area. And I took that film there last year. Genocide continues to occur over and over again, and not only to the same people, but sometimes in the exact same proximity. You might have been hearing recently about events taking place in Armenia and Azerbaijan in a place called Nagorno-Karabakh, also known as Artsakh, which is an Armenian term for Nagorno-Karabakh. That is somewhere around, oh, is my screen stopped working? Maybe. Oh, there it is. Nagorno-Karabakh is just there, also in the neighborhood. So what we learn from genocide is it's a little bit like perpetration of domestic crime, that those who perpetrate crimes against humanity are likely to perpetrate them again. And so the issue of impunity and the issue of justice is extremely important, because there was no justice after the Armenian genocide. And in fact, the Armenian genocide continued to be denied and still is denied to this very day, even though we can pinpoint on that map what the scale of the killing was in each of those sites, which you can see by the size of the little orange dots there. They represent the scale of the killing in each of those places. Still, it is being denied. And what it means is still that environment is extremely dangerous and violent. 1928, a book came out called 5 Fingers Over You. Interesting book, because it was about the Soviet Union. The author had traveled, actually got invited. He was an author and got invited to the Soviet Union to celebrate 10 years of the Soviet Union. So he wrote what effectively was a travel book, 5 Fingers Over You, a travel diary. But in what he was trying to do in this book was look at, so what's really going on here? What is happening in this totalitarian regime? Much to his host's dismay, he not only went back to Germany and wrote this book, they hoped would be a glowing recount of his time in the Soviet Union. He basically says this is a totalitarian regime that's going to destroy hundreds of thousands of people, which it did. And so he predicted the Stalinist purges of the 1930s and the Ukrainian famine and all that came, because it was obvious to him that that was the only outcome of what was happening there. 1933, a few years later, oh, by the way, this book was on the top 10 sellers in Germany at the same time as Mein Kampf, by the way. One was offering a way forward, away from totalitarianism. One was offering a way right into totalitarianism. So just watch your bestsellers list and be careful what you download on Kindle. So here we are, a few years later, 1933, and Hitler is in power and has been in power less than 3 months, when the first anti-Jewish boycott takes place. In fact, Dachau concentration camp had opened the day before. So a lot was happening in the new Third Reich as it started to put on the pressure on its persecutory ideology. 1st of April 1933, right across Germany, Jews woke up to this kind of behavior, where the Nazi SA was standing outside their stores with signs to say, "Don't buy from Jews." A couple of days later, a journalist sat down and wrote a letter. He wrote it to Adolf Hitler, and he said in that letter, "What you did to the Jews of Germany today, you did to me as a German. And I demand that you stop, because every open, free-minded German like me will rise up, and we will stop you, because if you do not stop, not only will you bring destruction upon the Jews of Europe, Jews of Germany, but you will bring shame upon our nation for all time." He sent the letter to the press, which of course by this time was controlled, and the author found himself in one of those newly opened concentration camps very shortly thereafter, after first receiving a very polite letter from the Adolf Hitler office. He was then arrested and sent to concentration camp. So go forward now to 1991, and I'm in Jerusalem at a conference, not a conference, an education program about the Holocaust. It's a 3-week immersive program for educators who are learning to teach about the Holocaust. And so every day we touched on some aspect of the Holocaust. And one day we talked about the righteous among the nations. These are people who risk their lives in order to save at least one Jewish person, and there has to be witnesses, two witnesses, that that Jewish person was saved by that person's action at the cost of their own life. So you couldn't just sort of slip a $100 bill and say, to the person and say, here's $100, please take me in. That would not qualify you. It had to be for free, and it had to be at risk. It's a very, very high order. You have to think about this. Imagine someone comes to your door in the middle of the night that you don't know, and already you're living in a police state, and you know already that if you do something that breaks the law, then you will be in one of those concentration camps, and for rescuing a Jewish person, you will die. Going to take that person in? 26,000 people have been awarded righteous among the nations, which among several hundred million wasn't exactly, everyone wasn't rushing to become righteous among the nations because they had no idea that that award would exist. They just amazing 26,000 people. People often said to me, how come there are so few people who rescue Jewish people? And I tried to answer that for quite a number of years. I would put my professor hat on, I would talk about statistics, and then eventually one day I went, wrong question. You can't ask the question, how come there were so few people, unless you know for certain that you would be one of them. If you can say for certain you would open the door and risk your wife, your children, your family, your spouse, whoever it is, your grandma, for the sake of some Jewish child that's standing on your doorstep, if you know that you would do that, then you can ask the question, how come there were so few? If you don't know for certain, then the only question you can ask is, how come there were so many? And how can I be like just any one of them? So all 26,000 people rescued at least one Jewish soul. Remarkable, remarkable people. So I learned about that. That afternoon, I went off to the old quarter of Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, which you might know it's divided into 4 different quarters that are not equal quarters, but they're nevertheless called quarters. And I was walking through this tunnel, which is in the Armenian quarter, and went through one of those little doors that's on the right, which happens to be the Armenian Cultural Museum. That's because I've been to Jerusalem many times, and I had done every other synagogue, church, museum that's possible to do, and I had never been to the Armenian Museum. So I wandered in to the Armenian Museum and looked around, and I started to see photographs of the Armenian genocide, like the ones I showed you earlier. And I looked on the photographs, and I noticed that they were all taken by the same person. It said A. Wegener, A. Wegener, A. Wegener, A. Wegener. So I turned to my friend Annegret, who was German, and was working at a museum in Germany. And I said to her, that's not Armin Wegener, is it? She goes, oh yeah. Armin Wegener is the only person in the world that's been given the title Righteous Among the Nations that never saved a single Jewish person. There he is planting his tree in Jerusalem in 1967 when he was awarded Righteous Among the Nations. Do you know why? Armin Wegener was the person that took the photographs of the Armenian genocide. Armin Wegener was the person that warned the world about the Soviet Union with 5 fingers over you. Armin Wegener was the person who wrote to Adolf Hitler and said, stop in my name, or we will never see the end of this. And it turns out he was the only person in 60 million people that used his voice that day. He's the only person on record saying, stop. And so Yad Vashem decided that was worthy of Righteous Among the Nations. And so in 1967, he got to plant his tree. And there you can see it today. Oops, I've gone a little farther forward, sorry. If I get time at the end of this, I'll play you a clip of Armin Wegener. Because when we were collecting testimonies of the Armenian genocide, long after most of the survivors are gone, I was speaking to the filmmaker who started the film, the archive of Armenian testimony. And I said to him, what made you think of doing this? And he said, well, I had this guy came to my home and he'd been in Armenia and during the genocide and he'd seen it. And he said to me, Michael, you're a filmmaker. You should really film the Armenian, the experience of the Armenian genocide. and the survivors before it's too late. And I said, who was that? He said, oh, you wouldn't know him. I said, it wasn't Armin Wegner, was it? He said, it absolutely was Armin Wegner. I said, you didn't have the presence of mind to film him, did you? He said, actually, I did. He was my first subject. And so Armin Wegner, who took the photographs, who fought for justice for the Armenians, who fought for justice for the Jews, who was recognized as righteous among the nations, was also the first audiovisual testimony of the Armenian genocide. And now there's thousands more that were filmed after him. And I might come back to that later. But first, I just want to move on. So when we think about the Holocaust, the list of atrocities and impact on the Jewish community, no citizenship, disbarred from marriage, restriction on birth, permission to travel, no access to education, no voting rights. It goes on and on and on. Except, of course, just one thing to say. We talk about human rights and we talk about genocide. The thing you need to watch out for actually is exclusion. Exclusion is the thing that underpins virtually all of the experiences that we've been talking about tonight. In fact, the president said it. We've got to expand who us, and we've got to, contract who they are. In a sense, that's actually at the heart of it. And the president's absolutely right that it's exclusion is when we exclude others from our lives, from our society, from our community, from our politics. It's when we don't turn towards each other and listen to each other and create that sense of we together that human rights abuses and ultimately genocide occur. I often say, as a scholar of genocide, that genocide is not about the mass killing of human beings. It's about exclusion taken to its ultimate extreme. That's what it was for the Jews of Europe. It's a slow process. This list here that you see on the left-hand side of this screen actually was not written for the Jews. It was written for the Rohingya. Somewhere, if I get my screen back again. And these two little girls in this picture that I took in Bangladesh had just fled Myanmar literally days before I took this photograph. And as you can see, some of you were mentioning, I think, I'm not sure who mentioned it, whether Zabina Leela mentioned the UNHCR and the other UN bodies. You can see literally they are there with their tarpaulins to help these children get a home. Because the creeping nature of the exclusion in Myanmar did not happen in 2017, 18. It's been going on for over 30 years. We have plenty of warning before genocide takes place. The question is, are we prepared to act on it? And what I loved about all your introductions this evening is you're already geared up for action. And that's exactly what we have to do. Like Armin Wegner, figure out how we're going to use our voice, because the parents of these children could have done with somebody using their voice before they were even born. Otherwise, these children would not have been refugees. In August 2017, and thank you so much, Hayden, for giving a really good introduction to the history of the Rohingya. I don't have to do that now, so we really appreciate you doing that. But in August 2017, when the attacks took place against the police outposts that were conducted by Rohingya resistance fighters. The following morning, by 10 a.m., the military unleashed their planned attack against the Rohingya all the way along. So when I went to go and speak to survivors in these little huts here that you can see that literally had been put up days before I took that photograph, their homes on the left-hand side had literally been burned down. They had to flee for their lives. Your statistics there were about right as well. Somewhere in the region of 600,000 came over, and somewhere in the region of 500,000 are still living under those conditions in Myanmar. It's not over. In fact, it's far from over, because the people who came across from Myanmar have very little to do to be able to salvage their lives. You're raising funds this evening for a very important cause, including, say, for example, for Margina, who you can see here. She was the first person that I spoke to. She was sitting with her two kids in what they call the waiting center. I wish they would call it the welcome center, but it's not. It's called the waiting center, because what you do in the waiting center is you wait. And she had been sitting there with her two children, who were 5 and 2, for 5 days, waiting for one of those little tarpaulin shacks. And actually the reason she didn't get put in a couple of days earlier was that unfortunately her 5-year-old disappeared into the refugee camp. And when she went to go and find him and retrieve him, they came to take her to her home, and then she missed her slot, so she had to wait. What you see in that piece of paper there, though, is I was just talking to her and the other mothers that were, sitting there. And what I soon began to find was that among the 8 people that I spoke to in the first 15 minutes of being in that refugee camp, they had lost an average of 1.5 members per family. And there were 600,000 of them. So it didn't take long to do the math to say, if this starts to be the case, then we're looking at over 100,000 deaths probably of Rohingya in the last 6 weeks. Those little boys there, that picture reminded me of those Armenian kids that were all lined up waiting for food. These little boys were all lined up for hours just waiting to get a cup of rice, because they became the parents sent the kids basically to try and get food. So what you're doing is really important for these people. Why? You cannot help with your fundraiser. You are not going to help 600,000 people. What you are going to do is you're going to give people like Marjana hope. You see, when you're in a situation like they're in, when you're living in a violent society, human beings are extremely resilient. This young woman here was actually 8 months pregnant, we found out while talking to her. I managed to get her actually into a UN hospital to give birth, which was good that she got somewhere safe to do that. Her husband had been shot in the back just a week previously as he was trying to run and protecting her and his 2 little boys. And so he didn't even make it out. So she's giving birth on her own. What they need, actually, as much as it would be nice to send a truckload of rice and hopefully that might buy that or whatever, what they actually need to know is people care. That matters way more. When you're in a situation when you're way down, what you really need to know is that people are out there and they're listening for you and they're rooting for you and they're having events like you put on this evening. That's actually what really counts. I then interviewed these 8 gentlemen the next day. They were actually running a madrasa. I only show you this partly because you can see that all of them, and this is just a random group of people, they did not come forward because they were survivors. I just picked them out of a crowd, and every single one of them, as you can see, had either family or homes or something destroyed. I'm going to share one of these with you. This here is Imam Sadiq. For those of you who are part of the Jewish tradition, you'll recognize the word Sadiq. This means righteous. And Imam Sadiq stepped forward, and he was sitting watching for a while and stepped forward and started to talk to me. I've interviewed hundreds of Holocaust and genocide survivors over the years. I've never interviewed anybody as tortured as Imam Sadiq. His wife, he had a little mosque. He was taken out of his mosque and had to bring out all of the Qurans and the whole, the learning books that they had for the children and all the rest of it, and burn them in front of the mosque under duress. He was taken and he was tortured for 4 days. He came back and found out that his wife had been gang raped by the military actually, and the Buddhist militia. And so he wanted to, get her safe as fast as possible. So he headed out immediately with, I think it was a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, their younger 2 children, took his wife and said, "We're going," and left, and asked his brother to bring along his 16-year-old and his 15-year-old when he came with the rest of the family, because they were all figuring out how to flee. When the military found out that the imam had left and run away with his wife, they killed his children. And so, well, it goes without saying, the guilt of, feeling like he exposed, by being the imam, he put his wife in danger because they, used her as a punishment for him and for the community. And then the guilt of feeling that he left his children behind who were then killed as a punishment to make him feel what he now is going through is awful. And then he has to be a leader in his community. And what a dignified gentleman. Let me just play you a minute if I can just get to it from here. I'm not sure if I can. That's my Zoom. Here we are. Let's try going here. Let me just try and play you a minute of Anwar Sadiq. This is him actually after the interview when I asked him to say what would he say to the wider world about what happened.
দুনিয়ার মানুষের আর তুন হইতে মনে হদে আছে আরারে আছে আরার আসলি নামান নদীরও আরারে আছে আজ 2000 বছর পর্যন্ত আছে আরারে জুলুমর রাখি দিয়ে দে আরার আছে বাপ দাদা বেগিনে এজবিন রই আরা তুন আছে জাগার দাস হদ আরা দেশর রাজালার আত্মটা থাকি বা দিও আরারে ন বলি হইর আছে জিনিসত করি আরা বেগুনর আছে পুরা বেলা দে আর দাস আরার কোরআন দে দাস আরার আলেমল দাড়ি মুসর পুরা দে দাদা আর দে এহতা গান আছে দুনিয়া এ দাসে ফরা ফেলে বলি আতুন দাস আবার নয়া তোর তাজা করি কথা গান আওয়াজ সাথে বেগুনর আছে শোনা দি বললা আতো কান জুতা গিয়ে দে আই আলানা সাথে হই দে হন সকসু বাসারা ইয়ান মাঝে দাস আর ওর যেদুন মুসিবত আইয়ে ইয়ানর দাস বরদাস্ত করি আর ভিতরে
So Anwar Sadiq literally willing to, as he said there, face death for this, which to me was just quite astounding to hear. I'm going to finish up by sharing what's happening right now. You see on the right-hand side, this is me talking to my two actually already very dear friends. I've only known them for a couple of months, Noor Siman and Noor Iman. They're sisters. They are from Xinjiang province in China. Noor Siman on the left, there is in Turkey, in Istanbul, and Noor Iman on the right is a journalist and she lives in Washington, D.C. And we were talking about what's happening to their family, who you can see on the left-hand side, her mother and her father and her two brothers, who they last spoke to in June 2017, which is over 3 years ago now. They haven't heard a word from them since. Noor Siman, who is on in the picture there, was very tenacious with the Chinese embassy in Istanbul and has now had a formal confirmation from the Chinese government that her mother, father, and two brothers are in jail in Xinjiang province. Their crimes are for conspiring to commit international terrorism. The crime apparently is the fact that their two daughters are abroad studying. They have been given 50 years between them, varying sentences. I, as a genocide scholar, have been studying what's happening in Xinjiang province, China, and I can share with you that what is happening. And if you want to read a little bit more about it, I was writing about it in the foreword this week, that there is no question that what is occurring is our acts of genocide. You don't have to kill 13 million Uyghurs or even attempt to kill 13 million Uyghurs in order to commit genocide against the Uyghur population. In fact, the convention is really quite clear that you can destroy in whole or in part, which includes preventing births within a group. 80% of the IUDs in China were fitted in Xinjiang province to Uyghur women last year. 80% of the entire IUDs fitted in China were fitted in Xinjiang province to prevent births of the Uyghur population. That is a genocidal act, as are the sterilizations. And for those of you who are interested in the human rights declaration this week, just take a look at that and then compare what's happening to the Uyghur in Xinjiang province, China, and you will see that they are completely destroying the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with the Uyghur. The two women that you see there, Noor Siman and Noor Iman, are just two ordinary women. I have to say, the parents that you're seeing in the middle of that picture, they're the people I want to meet most of all. These two women, one has an MBA, one has a PhD, they grew up in a little tiny village in the middle of nowhere in Xinjiang province, and their parents scraped together every dime they could. They said to their girls, education is the way for you to progress in the world and to become your best selves. And they ended up getting PhDs and MBAs and all the rest of it. And now they're spending every single waking hour, every single waking minute, just praying and trying to find a way to save their family, because it looks extremely grim for them and about 1 million other people. I was going to go and talk to you about technology, but now I'm not. I'm just going to see if there's any questions you've got, because we're about out of time. Oh, in fact, tell you what, let's just do it. Let's just have 1 minute with this really cool guy. So Pinchas Gutta is a Holocaust survivor. He spent a week talking about his experiences and answering questions. I'm just going to go to his. For those of you who are in school, you can get onto something called eyewitness.usc.edu. And if you do, you'll be among the first students ever to use this very cool tool that we just launched. And this is the first time I'm using it on any webinar anywhere. So this is Pinchas Gutta. We'll just ask him a couple of questions. This is in lieu of you asking me questions. Did you survive the Holocaust?
Yes, I did. I survived the Holocaust.
Do you think anything like the Holocaust could happen again?
Do I think if another Holocaust is possible? I mean, when I think of what is happening now and what has been happening since the Second World War, when hundreds of thousands of people were killed in Rwanda, when people by the hundreds of thousands are being killed in Syria, when human life is so cheap, how can I actually contemplate that it is impossible? I hope that it is impossible, but it's obviously not impossible because it's happening all the time. It may not happen in the same way or in the same mechanical, thought out, ideological, situation, but it's happening all the time. People are being killed because of different race, because of different religion, because of hate towards one another. So yes, I believe that it is possible. What kind, I don't know, but it is possible.
So that's Pinchas Gutta. If you want to learn more from Pinchas, you can go to Eyewitness, and he's got thousands of questions you can ask him. So please spend some time with him. I'm handing back to you, either Ali or Stacey. And thank you. I just want to say, first of all, just thank you guys for creating this enough project, and for the CRE and for your Holocaust Memorial. I want to tell you, it's just so empowering and inspiring that you're doing this. Please keep doing this, and don't stop when you leave school. Just keep doing it, because we can only get this done together. Thank you. Back to you.
We are now going to hear from Ivy Poole, our town supervisor, to close the event. Stephen, thank you so much. It was an incredible presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again, Stephen Smith, for that incredibly powerful presentation. I want to thank all of the speakers who joined us this evening for contributing your voices to what I hope is our first annual celebration of Human Rights Day here in Newcastle. There's so much division in this country and even here in our own community. And not only are we ideologically divided, we're physically divided as well. I'm here in my basement office and you're in yours. And we long for a better connection, and not a Wi-Fi connection. I mean hugs and handshakes and eye contact. And that's why it's all the more meaningful this year to be able to come together as a community to celebrate and to pledge our commitment to upholding and celebrating our shared humanity. At this special time of year, regardless of our faith, many of us find ourselves reflecting upon how we are living upon the earth, how we are treating our neighbors, and what hopes we have for the coming year. Peace, joy, love, goodwill. Achieving these ideals starts with each of us here in our own community and in our own homes. I know that I will be reflecting on tonight's speakers as I chart my course forward for the new year. And I'm so inspired by what I've heard here tonight, especially the student voices. Charlie, Sam, Leela, and Hayden, thank you. I look forward to supporting you and walking with you as we go forward into the new year. So thank you again to all the organizers, Ali Rosenberg and Stacy Science from the Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee, as well as the Enough Committee. And thank you to Carrie Krantz from Newcastle Community Media Center for providing tech support this evening. And once again, to all of our speakers, thank you. Good night, everyone, and stay safe. Thanks.